Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we are joined by Shanan Halbert, who is Labor's spokesperson for tertiary education and rainbow issues. Hey Shanan, welcome to the show.
Kia ora, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Shanan, in February 2019, the government announced that that the country's 16 institutes of technology and polytechnics were going to merge into a new organisation, Te Pūkenga, or the New Zealand Institute of Skills and Technology. And that merger came into being effective on the 1st of April 2020. Te Pūkenga was also responsible for industry training and apprenticeship training, and it took over responsibility from 9 industry training organisations. So what were the reasons in the first place that Labor established Te Pūkenga?
There was 2 main reasons, and people will remember back in that time that financial viability for individual institutions was quite problematic, and this comes from decades of underfunding our tertiary sector, whether that be in vocational education or whether that be in our universities as well. So at that particular time, the Labour government decided to establish Te Pūkenga to bring those institutions together to become more financially viable across the country and ensuring that equity of access to learning, no matter which community that you live in across Aotearoa New Zealand, is available. That took us a couple of years to establish. It's very difficult because our regions really love the idea of having their independent local polytechnic. People are quite nostalgic about that. But what we did see in the system is that there was a number of inconsistencies. What you learnt in one part of the country might not have been a consistent qualification in another. But the bottom line of it is the financial viability piece of how we ensure that every learner in this country has the opportunity available to them no matter where they are.
Great. After saying National would disestablish Te Pūkenga, since before the last election, on Monday, Penny Simmons finally confirmed that Te Pūkenga would be replaced with 10 regional standalone polytechnics from the 1st of January 2026. And Te Pūkenga would continue to operate until its disestablishment on the 31st of December 2026. In order to provide courses that weren't provided by the standalone institutions, 4 other institutions would remain as part of Te Pūkenga until early 2026, awaiting a decision on their viability. The government also plans to establish a new federation consisting of Open Polytechnic, Otago Polytechnic and UCOL. So what do you make of us returning to that old model?
Well, it is in fact an old model, and we know back in the day why it didn't work. It was simply because the country just couldn't afford the model that is in place. But that's what the minister's re-established. She's put forward 10 institutions that she says restores regional independence, or that polytechs can stand alone. But that's simply not true, because that's not the actual case in reality. So my view of her alternative plan is it's an absolute cluster. She hasn't provided the information to the relevant institutions, but most of all and most concerning is that she's left a number of institutions behind. What we've seen is that those that have scale become more financially viable and straightforward to establish themselves. But if we look at the media at the moment, we've seen Toi Oho Mai having to close their Tokeroa Taupō campus and reduce provision in Rotorua. We've seen Otago Polytechnic being incredibly loud in the media because they've been anchored by the Open Polytechnic and nobody told them before the announcement on Monday. Thirdly, we've seen North Tech up north, our most deprived community in the country, has been told is that their campus will be sold and that they will be downsizing. So what's across this, and the question that I've been asking the Minister, is what's the total number of job cuts as a result of her decisions as minister, and what advice has she received about future job cuts, to which her response has been, that she's not responsible. As the minister, you have to show leadership in this when you've got hundreds of jobs at stake, if not over 1,000 in the sector. You've promised regional independence. That's not what you've delivered. And lastly, she refuses to provide the financial advice that she's been given to say that her alternative actually stacks up. So, the thing with Minister Penny Simmonds, she was the CEO of SIT. She absolutely hated Te Pukenga and its centralised model, and her approach has simply been a vendetta since.
Wow. Dr. Sandra Gray, the National Secretary of the Tertiary Education Union, appeared on TVNZ Breakfast on Tuesday, and she said that this move by Penny Simmonds would result in hundreds of job losses and dozens of course cancellations. She said that people are actually in tears about it. How messy and taxing on staff has the transition away from Te Pukenga been during a cost of living crisis?
That's right. I mean, the sector has been through incredible change under Te Pukenga anyway, and the minister has chosen to disestablish and re-establish, as opposed to working through resolving the issues or the things that she might not have liked in Te Pukenga itself. It's a more expensive approach that she's taken on. It has resulted in hundreds, if not thousands, of job cuts as a result, and the closure of campuses across the country. And so she set up a federation that no institutions want to be a part of, and so their motivation has been to just cut staff, cut resources, cut support services, cut campuses, cut courses, in order to look like they are financially viable. But what's at stake here is access to education for our most rural communities out there, like Tokoroa, like Gisborne, like Kaikohe and Kaitaia. It's just not good enough, and it's really sad that she's not taking on the advice that has been available to her. And as you can see, my friend, I'm pretty passionate about this.
That's good to see. We saw 150 job cuts from Te Pukenga in March, and you tried, as you said, to get Penny Simmonds to answer how many jobs would be lost in Parliament yesterday, and we all saw that. But yeah, she did hide behind how she's not responsible. And but I was interested in just how many jobs do you think could be cut?
Well, so we know that there's been about 750 cut to date, and that there'll be hundreds more proposed to be cut or at risk as a result of her decisions. So well over 1,000 is what I'm thinking. And that's not just politics. There's also cuts to the workforce development councils, because she's chosen to disestablish those two. They would have been doing excellent work between the education system and industry. She's made significant cuts to TEC. She's committed to closing down Te Pukenga, and the experience and the learnings, most of all, that have come out of that. So, the vendetta approach of Penny Simmonds has just been mind-boggling. The sector is struggling because their jobs and livelihoods are at stake. But most of all, at the centre of this, she's really forgotten about learners, and not just young people. We have an increase in unemployment in this country that usually encourages people to go and retrain. And we have numbers of NEETs, young people not engaged in education or training or employment, just off the record at the moment. This is a time where we want Polytechs, vocational learning, to really step up to support our future industries. The final part on this that I do want to mention, of course, is the industry backlash. As Penny Simmonds said, that there will be much more of a leadership role in the future of vocational education. And the submissions that we heard in the legislation before the Select Committee last week is that industry are unhappy. She's failed them and broken her promises that she has made. And instead of giving them more of a leadership role in influencing what the future of vocational education looks like in this country, she's given herself more power and influence to make decisions. So, it's just off the charts.
Wow. When it comes to programs being cut, how many do you think are going to go on the chopping block, and what does it mean when it comes to job opportunities?
Well, we know in communities like Tokoroa, Taupo, Kaikohe, that provision in vocational areas like agriculture, forestry, the trades, are important to upskilling people from those communities and getting them into jobs as a result. Those are the courses that are at stake here because they tend to be a little bit more expensive. We have this argument too around student ratios to balance the books, and this is the equity piece that's really important to keep in mind. In places like Auckland, where you have scale of population, you can fill a classroom of 20 to 30 students. But in a place like Kaikohe, it's much more difficult to enrol 10 to 15 students. And so the over and unders that we call them in the sector is you tend to over enroll in large scale areas to balance out the lower numbers that you have in smaller communities to ensure that that provision is available. And so that's the part that is lost. So if Kaikohe, for example, can't enrol 18 to 20 students in a class, then that course won't run for the 12 to 15 students that may have enrolled. That is an absolute disgrace. That doesn't meet the equity needs of rural communities, and so I'm incredibly concerned about that overall.
Now, I think you might have mentioned this earlier, but I was curious what evidence Penny Simmons has shown, or official advice, that these reforms of hers will make polytechnics more financially sustainable.
Well, there's two parts, because I'm unsure that the Minister actually is looking at evidence, because if she was, she wouldn't be making the decisions that she is making. The advice that she is taking on board is her sole advice, aligned with her vendetta against Te Pukenga, which comes from her experience at SIT. So while it might have worked for SIT, it doesn't work for the sector as a whole, and that's what we are trying to achieve. The key point for me and worry is that she's chosen to put up an alternative plan, which is fine, and any government has the right to do that. But when asked, she refuses to provide the financial advice that she has received to demonstrate and for the public to have confidence that her alternative plan is financially viable. She refuses to give me that information.
Okay, it might seem like an obvious question, but why is making vocational education and training work well important for New Zealand?
Well, we've got to make sure that we're training people for future jobs. And so whether it's about ensuring that we train enough farmers for what the industry requires, whether we're meeting the needs of areas like forestry and agriculture, or hospitality and tourism, we've got to make sure that people are qualified, that they have the skills, so that they can be successful in employment.
Okay, so what kind of impacts do you think National's reforms will have on our Māori and Pacific Island earners?
Well, Minister Penny Simmons has decided in this year's budget to remove equity funding specifically dedicated to Māori and Pacific learners. That's disappointing, and it's actually unnecessary, because that's not what we've seen from Minister Reti under the university system, for example. So that inconsistency is not what gives the sector any certainty. We know that Māori and Pacific are overrepresented in our unemployment numbers, so the pastoral care and support that is in place is extra important. Second to that is she's removed the reference of Te Tiriti o Waitangi from the legislation, and she has failed to consult Māori in this legislation throughout the whole process until 1:30 on Monday, an hour before she was about to make the announcement of the 10 institutions standing alone that she chose to inform and let the iwi leadership group know that she was doing this. So, she's got no commitment to Māori, she has no commitment to Pacific peoples, and so I just don't know what is driving her motivation other than an absolute vendetta.
Overall, how would you sum up the situation facing staff and students and Māori and Pacific Island learners now, and what is Labour's position going into the future?
So I've described this as an absolute cluster. The Minister has disestablished a system that was working and was demonstrating that it was more financially viable. It certainly wasn't perfect, but she could have just tweaked the things that needed to be fixed, that weren't working, and ensured that the sector itself, staff and students, had the certainty available to them that they needed to. What she's decided to do is to take a couple of years to kick the can down the road while she works out how she's going to achieve financial sustainability for the sector. And she's made an absolute mess of it. The government should be embarrassed. Industry doesn't support them. The sector itself don't support the decisions that are being made. So I just don't know who she's listening to.
Thanks very much, Shanan. It's been good to have you here on the show, and welcome you back anytime you want to come back and keep us updated about what's going on in tertiary education or in rainbow issues for that matter. So thank you very much for your contribution today. It's been really good to hear from you exactly what's really going on.
Kia ora, thanks so much. We've got a fight in front of us, but we can do it together.
Yeah, I agree. Let's do it.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah.